Our final speaker before we have a little short refreshment break, and then we have Martin Brown from Equity, and then the big debate starting at 6:45. If you have a question for that big debate, still time to write it down, put it in the box out in the foyer, and we will get to it a little bit later on. But next up, would you please welcome to the stage, talk about Creative Bath and the Theatre Royal, please welcome Greg Ingham.
Well, hello, and well done for those who've survived the whole day. Who's been here the whole day? That's pretty good. Such stalwarts, and a while to go just yet. I suspect that all of you, certainly most of you, will know an awful lot more about theatre than I do. But with that odd caveat at the beginning, I'd like to talk initially about Creative Bath, then about the theatre per se, and then about the Theatre Royal that I'm very proud to be the chairman of. So, Creative Bath. Some of you will know, I suspect many of you won't know what that is. We link the creative businesses, professionals and students in the Bath area. We aim to promote creative businesses, to attract and retain talent, to lobby the council where appropriate, and generally to promote Bath as a great place for creative businesses, a great place to work. It was founded in 2008, rather nerdily. When I left Future, which I ran for some time, I was aware of 28 businesses which had spun off from Future, creative businesses. And I thought, that's interesting. There's a ton of creative businesses in the city, and we don't seem to get together. At the same time, it turned out, in some other universe, the council were thinking, well, this is a really interesting sector, and we don't have a way into it. And out of that happenstance on both sides came Creative Bath. I'll throw you a bunch of stats at various stages. I go, oh my God, it's the last speech of the day. I'm going to talk stats, but I'm going to do a few. Anyway, here we go. One piece of research we did early days with Creative Bath was simply how important it was economically to the city. And this was done by an agency called GWE Business West, independent agency, who worked out that the economic impact to the city of Bath of the creative sector was actually greater than retail and tourism combined. Greater. In part, that's because many of these are independent businesses. However it comes about, it's actually greater. Just hold that for a second. Just think that through. How we, and pretty much everyone else, thinks about this city. It's tourism, it's Georgiana, it's heritage, it's Romans, it's spas, and so on. You know what? It's actually slightly wrong. That's not where the economic driver of the city is now. We, you, us, all of us, in different ways, are helping the creative growth of this city. Our funding in Creative Bath comes from a variety of sources. It comes from events that we run. We charge for events. It comes from sponsorship from companies who wish to get close to the creative sector. We have a great strategic partnership with Bath University, a superb organisation. But the single largest is from Baines. And Baines may, in some cases, be not quite a dirty word, but a slightly suspect word in this context. But in terms of the funding that Creative Bath gets from Baines, we wouldn't exist without it. And they've done a lot to help us help the creative businesses foster and survive and thrive in the city. A few more stats. We've got something like 6,500 Twitter followers. There's over 30 events a year, from keynotes from people like Michael Eavis at Glastonbury through to a whole variety of business people. Our membership is extremely diverse. Think of this as the creative sector, and I will come to theatre in a moment, honest. Everything from magazine publishers to web developers to ad agencies to architects, filmmakers, designers, book publishers, artists, digital agencies, musicians, and performing arts companies. The most singular of all the companies that we interact with through Creative Bath, undoubtedly, the theatre as a genre is the most singular. And here's something else to pause on. Think of this. Just think of the strangeness of what theatre, in the broadest sense, actually is, in comparison to virtually any other artistic, creative endeavour. All other creativity has some sort of tangible outcome, a product, if you will, or ability to be recorded. Books, art, magazines, music, film, website, buildings, drawings, advertising, design, apps, all of those exist after the event. All can be consumed later in whichever way. Theatre doesn't and can't. It's ephemeral. It's an impish sprite. Miss it, and you miss it. It can be recorded, but isn't. It doesn't work that way. You need to be there. You need to experience it. You need to suspend your disbelief. You need to be transported for a couple of hours to experience something collectively and yet singularly. It's societally because we're in a group, and yet it's very personal. Mere recordings won't work, haven't worked. You take Hazlitt's insight into Shakespeare, and his genius residing in his ability to successively animate individual characters from others' perspective. It only applies if you witness it directly and hear and see the reaction, and then the reaction to the reaction. It's repetitive yet singular. Each performance, it's weird, is the same and yet, of course, different. It's part of what personally attracts me to the theatre, although, as I stressed at the beginning, I know much less about it than most of you. But you then think also from another perspective why it's weird. All that writing and planning and researching and rehearsing, and the AV and the marketing and the management and the promotion and everything that's behind the theatre, all for a handful of evanescent performances. Gone in a trice. It's a singular world, freighted with insight, but fraught with uncertainties at every single stage in that process. And of course, this world, our world, is a world which touches people deeply, uniquely, where even the most familiar of lines and much-seen plays can have remarkable new interpretations. For those of you there, think of Lear this summer at the Theatre Royal, an extraordinary performance. And this world, here I'll come on to the Theatre Royal, is actually a pretty reasonably sized world. Here comes some more stats. I'm going to do it. There we go. Audience numbers, I was surprised to discover it is as many as this. Through the year, there are just under 270,000 visitors to the Theatre Royal. 270,000. Of those, the vast bulk of the main house, about 230,000, and about split 20,000 between the Egg and the Euston. I'll talk a little bit about each of those subsequently. There's a part of the Theatre Royal which you may be less familiar with, which is as a touring company, a company which produces plays and then tours them through the provinces, through the West End, and sometimes into the States. A couple of years back, there were 7 such tours, 2 of those in the West End. This last year just gone, 10 plays from Bath, created in Bath, taken out, 4 in the West End. Regional theatres, smaller theatres such as Bath, simply aren't doing that sort of work. To give you an idea of scale, there are 53 permanent employees in the theatre, a further 100 or so on the payroll, about 15 full-time equivalents as they're called. So about mid-60s or so, 70 people perhaps in all. So that alone is a significant part of the overall worth of the creative sector. Turnover, here's a big number, 13.5 million in the year just gone. It's a very sizable endeavour as well as being a creatively successful endeavour. In terms of range, you could pick anything from Lear to the Moomins. Anyone know the Moomins? It's on for the first time ever in the UK. That's a plug. There we go. At the Egg this December. From the award-winning American series at the Euston to the Queen's Knickers. Who's heard of the Queen's Knickers? Another one at the Egg. You're in there. Good for you. From the Full Monty to Feston. How about that for a range? From, I don't know, the beautiful Felicity Kendall and Simon Callow, both here next week at the Theatre Royal, by the way, to Ian McKellen, Patrick Stewart, Derek Jacobi, to the then rising stars of Rebecca Hall and Michelle Dockery, to multiple others yet to rise. It's been a great fostering ground of talent, a great way of promoting, and a great way for us who are interested in the theatre to see those amazing stars, but also those rising stars as well. From mainstream to the most experimental studio theatre, from West End, even New York, to educational outreach programs. It's a very big endeavour. I would argue, passionately, proudly, it's a tremendous, remarkable beacon for Bath and for Bath's creativity. Notionally, at least, I was due to be talking about creative catalysts, so I'm going to come on to that now, see if this works. So you think of that range of activity, some of which you'll be familiar with, some of which you may know slightly less about. What are the catalysts for that? How does it come about, beyond the momentum of history, beyond the professionalism, the desire to have a range, a portfolio, a repertoire, and so on of productions? And of course, beyond applied creativity, which is right at the heart of the offering. What are the drivers? Well, I figured 5 or 6 drivers, and slightly uncomfortably, I have to say they spelt out an acronym, which is pure chance, and actually isn't that relevant, but it did anyway, so I'll tell you it. The first of which is a potentially very dirty word. Money. Money is an absolute catalyst for creativity for the theatre, and here's why. Because the main house makes a profit in its own right, and the touring company can make substantial profits when hits occur. There's then the ability for massive cross-subsidy in the two other areas which can't make a profit and shouldn't and aren't able to and so on. The Egg, the youth theatre, and the Eustonhof, the art house black box studio theatre, both of which are constrained by size, both of which, well, in the Egg's case, certainly constrained by pricing. You could not make money, however many times, how many bums on seats you got in those. So it's a huge cross-subsidy. So money generated by the theatre is one of the biggest reasons why it can drive its own creativity. It's extremely fortunate. I'll come on to the fortune thing subsequently. It can also enable risk-taking when it comes to the main house. The summer season, for many years, the Peter Hall summer season, we've been able to run plays which are far too expensive, could never recoup their costs in Bath, but provide great creative resource to the city and a great promotional resource to the city to attract tourism, national press coverage, and so on. Some of which have then gone on to become productions subsequently. But the ability to take that risk is born of knowing that the endeavour itself is profitable. Second up, opportunity. Back in the mid-90s, there appeared to be a decreasing number of productions available for the provinces, productions of a decent enough quality. The West End then, perhaps the West End now, was focused on the really, really big hits, the really expensive things that can run for gazillion weeks at whatever price and sell out to lots of tourists and so on. Fine. But you couldn't typically tour those through the provinces. Far too expensive. There was then an opportunity. And it was, and I can say this because it's absolutely nothing to do with me. This isn't hubris at all. This is the team run by Danny Moore, the managing director of the theatre, and the then chairman, Roy Griffiths, spotted an opportunity to say, well, you know what? One, we want great programming in Bath, but two, if we're willing to be entrepreneurial and take risk, we can then produce such plays regionally, nationally, potentially internationally. So that opportunity point, the theatre is constructed as a charity, it absolutely adheres to all its charitable endeavours and so on, but in some characteristics, it operates like a business so that it can generate surpluses then to plough back into the rest of the activities. The third, I would argue, is reputation. You know that a fellow quote about reputation, oh, I've lost my reputation. Conversely, if your reputation over time continues to build, if you're able to attract the best actors, particularly the best directors, you're even able to get the London critics out from London to write about these plays and then amplify the whole thing. Your reputation precedes you and enables you then to do yet bigger, probably the wrong word, more interesting creative work than you would do otherwise. So reputation is the third. The fourth is one of those, I hesitate because I think it's a statement of the bleeding obvious, and yet. Fourth is audience. That it's one thing for all of us, all of you perhaps, in different creative ways, absolutely to be thinking about your creativity, how you communicate it, what you want to say, what you want to do, and so on. But actually, I would argue, it always needs to be subordinated to the audiences. Ultimately, somehow, somewhen, people are going to pay with their money, or particularly with their time, to go and watch what you are putting on. And I would argue, at least as much, start with your audience and work backwards, and then meld the two between your creativity and actually your need to get people to come and see what you do. Art isn't in a vacuum. Where are we up to? Fourth, fifth, possibly, is luck. I think luck is incredibly underestimated when it comes to all forms of different businesses and so on. That, history is told by the winners, and business books are written by those who've triumphed in some extraordinary way and so on, and they tell their reality backwards from pinnacle right up there. How do they get up there? A whole bunch of things, of which luck is usually a very, very key part. Here's a key element for the theatre's luck. Back in, again, it was end of 90s or so, there was this, some of you may remember it, an utterly decrepit cinema, like I said, now it's gone, called the Robins. It was an archetypal Brit flea pit. You can't call it anything other than that. By chance, the Odeon, and I wouldn't normally say this, in their wisdom, certainly wouldn't say that, realised there's an opportunity for them to have a proper big, in their terms, cineplex sort of thing in Bath. And to do that, there's a bit of chicanery to say, well, if the Robins disappeared somehow, we could then have a clear run to do the Odeon and so on. It would all sort of make sense. We can cross-subsidise things off. However. someone spotted the opportunity to say, actually, you can transform that Brit Flea Pit into a youth theatre. That caught the imagination, particularly of two groups. Three groups. The creative team at the Theatre Royal, what was then the youth theatre group particularly, the kids and all else through of youth, of schools and education and so on, who realised there was a great opportunity to have that as the focal point of youth creativity for Bath. And thirdly, the donors. I've talked a little bit about money, but I would absolutely stress this with the Theatre Royal that there's been a tremendous amount of donations to it to enable other activity to happen. Not to enable the main activity, that exists and gets on, but to enable new stuff to happen. And the egg was absolutely based on the generosity of several donors at that time. But at the core was luck. A great building right on the corner, if you know the topography of the theatre, it's like playing Monopoly. It's that corner chunk next to the, it all made sense. Put it together, transform that, cross-promote across the other activities, then you've got a very interesting creative space across the Black Box studio of the Youth Snuff, the Egg Youth Theatre, and then, of course, the main house. The last one, I hesitated on the fifth one, I think I hesitated more on this one, is soul. We can talk a lot about luck and money and creativity and so on, but like any artistic endeavour, if there isn't authenticity, if there isn't a soul, if there isn't an actual sense of purpose why something happens, it's just a building. And I would absolutely argue that Theatre Royal Bath is not just a building. And of these, I just want to end, you think, oh good, just want to end and highlight a little bit more about luck. It's always struck me as very interesting the part luck plays. Think of the theatre's great fortune of having a beautiful building bequeathed 208 years ago. That luck resonates through the centuries. The extraordinary philanthropy that saved the theatre from ruin in the 1980s, led by Jeremy Fry, much-loved man who did so much for the creativity of the city. Think of the fortunate attraction of Bath. For residents, for tourists, yeah, even those London critics, that support such an offering. Or the luck, frankly, wasn't intended, of stumbling into a business model which enables that cross-subsidising, of taking plays with success outside Bath and then producing other productions in Bath. Elsewhere is paying for Bath's creativity. How good a model is that? By luck. But when you think of that luck, those elements of luck, think also how fortunate Bath is to have so much enjoyment, enhanced reputation, and yes, money generated by the theatre. And that's all without public money, which in virtually every single other city, a main theatre like the Theatre Royal would be being subsidised by public money and specifically by local public money. So think of this, perhaps counterintuitively, somewhere in the public coffers, surely that very unfunded success creates an opportunity for other Bath theatres. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed, Greg Ingham. Are you happy to take any questions
Yeah,
if
sure.
they're thrown your way? Does anybody have any questions at all for Greg about what he's been talking about? Perhaps not. Oh, yes, we do have a question down here.
Hello. Oh, thank you. Just when you're talking about how so much of the great work Theatre Royal does that then goes off to tour and travels around, that feeds back into Theatre Royal itself, would the Theatre Royal ever consider an outreach that supports community groups within Bath? Would it ever move back? Because you're obviously a great way of showing how you've succeeded without funding. Would you ever consider sharing that more directly with other companies or people who are trying to produce in a community, maybe theatre scale?
I think, I'm afraid it's one of those sort of up to a point questions, because there's two reasons. One is the charity commissions and the member arts that we operate within about what we are allowed to do under that, under the charity commission, essentially. But the other is a more practical point, that to seek to fund or be involved with other organisations is actually quite problematic in terms of logistics and preference and choice and so on. But I think what we have done and would do more of is, for example, the community play which we ran a couple of years back that was in Bath. Even things like the Bath Operatic Society, again giving them a platform to the main house. And frankly, because it is employing and using so many technicians and artists and so on through the organisations, I think it is, by its success, able to put more back into the community. But I think actually funding a completely standalone, I think would be problematic. But it's something that we have considered, and I think we'll consider again. Or help. Yeah.
Sharing your expertise, like we are doing, to whether there would ever be a time you could have a platform where you could just talk openly to others.
I think there's probably much more of that that's done in the youth theatre area with schools. There's an outreach programme into the schools, both from a technical point of view and artistic point of view. I suspect there's probably more we can be doing in a slightly more sort of adult theatre generally. The theatre is a strong success. It probably could contribute more to the local community and artistic endeavours locally than it does. Yeah, yeah.
A question over here. Just get the microphone to you. Thank you very much.
Hi, Greg Martin Brown from Equity. Theatre Royal Bath is quite an unusual creature in regional theatre, that you're a producing theatre with quite a range of work that has no Arts Council funding going in at all.
Yeah.
Do you think for you there's some specific advantage in being an unfunded organisation?
I think there is, because there's, I slightly wear my creative bath hat here, there's a danger when you're seeking funding that so much of, X% of your time is spent on chasing funding. And I'm sure, any organisation will have had it here. The amount of grants and forms and applications and process and not knowing who you got and hoping you get and so on, it saps the soul and takes you away from doing what you're best at, what you're most interested in, which is creative work. So I think Theatre Royal is on that list of why it's fortunate, because it doesn't have that need for public funding. It then doesn't have the tail wagging dog, so it's not too much focus on that. There is one area where we have not public funding, but external funding, which I'd just like to stress again, is from donations, from trust funds, from individuals who, it's usually directly correlated, and more particularly in the egg, to pay money here or invest money here, and this is then what happens as a result. So it helps fund individual projects. But I think it's much, much more liberating to be able to say, well, you know what, we're going to stand on our own 2 feet, we've got all these advantages, we've got to be very careful that we don't over-commercialise the thing, because that's a danger the other way, of course, and we're not a commercial entity, but it does free you a lot, and I genuinely, really sympathise with anyone who's having to plod through the process, the grim process, trying to get funding in current times in the public markets.
And yes, we have some questions here at the back. You can either bellow, Andy, or we'll get a microphone to you. You're going to bellow? You're going to bellow.
Bellow slowly, I'm going to drink some water.
I've been very fortunate to work a lot with the Theatre Royal as a technician and as a director and so on, and it is a very interesting model. But there's a very interesting thing with regional theatres, and you're talking about taking risk. I'm wondering what the pressures are on you that a lot of regional theatres go to London for their creative talent, that shows are rehearsed more often in London than they are in Bath. That happens down the road in Bristol as well. And what are the pressures on you to do that?
The pressures are a combination of practical and personal, that it is often easier to get a group of actors together in London than it is to get them all together in Bath. And that's to do with where they live, where their agents are, their other commitments and so on, as well as a sort of, and there is still a natural focal point to London. So it's not it's not an insuperable pressure, it's not, you work with it, essentially. I don't think it's a barrier.
Do you think there will be a position where the Theatre Royal, particularly, we know that the Eustonov had more local work, it's now very London-centric again, we know that the Egg works very much with the local community. Yeah. Would there be a position where Theatre Royal Productions would actually try and harness the huge amount of talent in the Southwest in terms of performers, writers and directors into a professional thing?
Okay, to unpack the question the other way around, certainly the start point isn't, let's go to London and get the best people. The start point is, what do we wish to do and who are the best people for it? Now, X% query what that might be will be London-based. There is a London centricity to so much of business life and so on. But there's no barrier, there's no prejudice, there's no desire not to use great local talent of whatever sort.
Thank you very much. And I think, was there a question from you, Phoebe? You were going to say that it's been done.
It's a bit weird.
It's been done. How spooky is that? Any further questions at all? Oh, yes, question down here at the front. Thank you.
This is a question, it's more about actors, local actors. I've looked at Theatre Royal and The Egg, and I've asked about workshops and things like that, just like getting involved, and there wasn't really anything useful given. I was just wondering if you would be looking into making that possible, so local actors could just get involved really, just like, you know, little things like that. I don't know.
From a workshop point of view, developmental, or from an actual performance point of view? Both, presumably.
Just workshop or like anything, Q&As, I don't know, just anything that's weekly or any, like it, yeah.
So, put words in your mouth, almost a sort of grown-up version of some of the egg stuff, is that
Yeah, well, I mean, because I'm 18, so I'm sort of on the edge of youth workshop things.
Right.
So it's kind of, I'm stuck between, and there didn't seem to be anything available. I just didn't know if...
You've touched on a very interesting point there, that the Egg has been going for, I don't know, 8 years or so, and YPT Youth Theatre for many years before that. And there is a sort of an uneasy transition that almost exactly to your age and a little bit older, takes youth, and then what? And the question is, should the Egg have a sort of a life sort of beyond in some way? And that's an open question at the moment, and I think this will prompt the discussion again. I think there's a very good point there, because it is one thing, and I hope it's a good thing, the amount of nurturing and development and opportunity it's given, but then it sort of stops. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, it does stop.
Okay, would you all please join me in thanking Greg Ingham, everybody. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, thanks a lot.